Have you ever thought about why the concept of positive thinking has become so popular in recent years? Why are you here now to challenge this notion? The universe has led you here at this very moment to discover a deeper truth that is often overlooked. Positive thinking is presented in today's society as a miracle cure, the key to happiness, success, and health. Books, courses, and gurus teach us that if we just think positively long enough, we can change our lives and overcome any challenge. At first glance, this message seems tempting, almost like a promise of a life without worries, full of ease and success. But what if positive thinking doesn't just bring benefits? What if there is also a dark side that we often ignore because we are so focused on the pursuit of happiness? Is it possible that the compulsion to always be positive disturbs our inner balance and harms us in subtle ways? The truth is that positive thinking, when it becomes a duty, can be a crushing weight on our shoulders. Instead of freeing us, it puts subtle pressure on our mind and body. Whenever we force ourselves to ignore negative thoughts and emotions in order to maintain the appearance of optimism, we create an inner imbalance. This inner conflict, between what we really feel and what we pretend to feel, can leave deep scars. Imagine wearing a mask of positivity even when your inner self is torn apart by doubts, fears, and insecurities. This mask may project an image of strength and happiness to the outside world, but a storm is brewing inside you. The pressure to always be strong and optimistic suppresses your true feelings and forces you to ignore them. But the emotions don't go away, they accumulate, deep in your mind and body, until they begin to manifest as physical symptoms. In this introduction, we look at the illusion that positive thinking can create. It is often promoted as a panacea, but the reality is more complex. When we succumb to the pressure to be positive all the time, we open the door to an invisible burden that can wreak havoc on our minds and bodies. It's important to recognize this dark side and question whether positive thinking is always the right way to go. Now we come to the specific dangers that arise when positive thinking is not authentic and how it distorts our approach to negative emotions. Let's delve deeper into the world of toxic positivity and understand what happens when we don't recognize our true feelings. Positive thinking has become like a mantra in our society. We are told everywhere, think positive. Everything will be fine if you want it enough. But what happens when this constant striving for positivity becomes a compulsion? When we no longer allow ourselves to feel genuine, authentic emotions? Then a phenomenon known as toxic positivity arises, the compulsion to be positive all the time, even when life gives us reasons to be angry, sad, or anxious. Toxic positivity is a kind of emotional suppression. It arises when we or other people convince ourselves that there is no room for negative emotions. It is the idea that any shadow of sadness, fear, or anger must be immediately covered up with a smile and a positive attitude. But this obsession with positivity is dangerous. It forces us to bury our real feelings deep inside instead of recognizing and processing them. And anything we suppress doesn't just disappear, it builds up inside us and starts to affect our emotional and physical well-being. A common example of toxic positivity is the way we are often forced to stay strong or make the best of it in difficult situations. For example, someone might be going through a serious illness or experiencing a major life crisis, and instead of receiving support and compassion, they are told to simply look on the bright side. Such statements may be well-intentioned, but they minimize the real human experience and push the person to ignore their deepest, real feelings. But what happens inside us when we force ourselves to always be positive? The reality is that when our negative emotions are suppressed, they don't go away. They turn into subtle tensions that settle in our bodies. If we don't allow ourselves to feel sadness, anger, or fear, we keep these feelings inside us, which leads to internal pressure in the long term. This emotional pressure can manifest itself as discomfort, insomnia, or even chronic complaints. The philosophy of always being positive robs us of our emotional freedom. It forces us to act against our nature, because humans are made to experience the full spectrum of emotions. Sadness and pain are just as natural and necessary parts of life as joy and happiness. If we constantly tell ourselves to only see the light, we lose touch with our wholeness. This creates an inner split where we deny the dark sides of ourselves instead of integrating them. The image of toxic positivity is often reinforced on social media, where we are bombarded by perfect lives on a daily basis. The constant portrayal of success, happiness, and optimism gives the impression that negative feelings are out of place. But the truth is that it is authentic and healthy to allow and deal with the difficult emotions. The goal is not to always be positive, the goal is to be real. Now that we have a better understanding of the mechanisms behind toxic positivity and emotional suppression, in the next chapter we will move on to what happens when we suppress pain and negative emotions. We will see how these emotions, if left unattended, can put a strain on the body and cause long-term chaos. When we force ourselves to see only the positive sides of life, a darker side emerges that we often don't want to recognize. But what really happens when we deny pain, sadness, and anger? These emotions don't simply disappear because we ignore them or tell ourselves that we shouldn't feel them. On the contrary, they bury themselves deeper in our subconscious and begin to influence us unnoticed. Emotions are like waves, they come and go. But if we don't allow them to flow freely, they build up like water that can't find an outlet. Grief, anger, and fear that we suppress become trapped inside us and can affect us in many ways. There is a deep connection between our emotional state and our physical well-being. So when we ignore our pain, our body bears the burden. The famous psychoanalyst Carl Jung once said, "What you repress becomes your destiny." These words aptly summarize how repressed emotions can control our lives without us consciously realizing it. If you constantly avoid negative feelings, if you don't allow yourself to grieve or feel anger, you often look for other ways to compensate for this inner pressure. This can manifest itself in unhealthy ways of dealing with stress, emotional eating, or even physical discomfort. The human body is a fascinating vessel that stores not only physical but also emotional information. If you feel fear or pain and do not process these feelings, they leave traces in your muscle tissue, in your digestion, in your sleep rhythm. Chronic headaches, stomach problems, or tension in your back can often be the direct result of emotional burdens that you carry inside you. A typical example is the physical reaction to chronic stress. If you keep forcing yourself to think positively and ignore your true feelings, your body releases stress hormones such as cortisol. This hormone helps the body to deal with stress in the short term, but if the stress continues over a longer period of time, as is the case when you are constantly fighting your true feelings, this leads to a permanent strain on the body. Your immune system is weakened and you become more susceptible to illness. This link between emotions and physical health is also deeply rooted in psychosomatics. Many people who suppress their true feelings for years develop physical ailments for which there is no obvious medical cause. These can be migraines, chronic back pain, or gastrointestinal problems. The body speaks when the mind is no longer heard. A striking example of the consequences of suppressed emotions can be found in the story of Louise Hay, a pioneer of self-healing and author of the book Heal Your Body. She realized that many of her own physical complaints were linked to unresolved emotional conflicts. Once she began to accept and heal her true feelings, her physical well-being improved. This story shows us that healing on an emotional level often brings healing on a physical level. But what is the solution? Instead of ignoring pain and grief, we need to learn to allow and process these feelings. It's okay to be sad. It's okay to be angry. These feelings are part of the human experience, and only when we acknowledge them can we truly let them go. Denial of pain leads us to a dead end, while consciously living through negative emotions is the path to true healing. In the next chapter, we will look at how the compulsion to always be optimistic puts the body under chronic stress and how this can lead to burnout and exhaustion in the long term. Let's now dive deeper into the effects of forced optimism and its relationship to stress. If we look further at the compulsion for positivity, it becomes clear that it has not only emotional but also profound physical consequences. After all, what happens when we keep pushing ourselves to be optimistic, even though our inner world says something completely different? A constant inner conflict arises that puts increasing pressure on our body. This pressure causes our system to fall into a state of chronic stress, a state that weakens our body and mind in the long term. Optimism is often touted as a panacea for all problems. But forced optimism, the expectation that you must always be in a good mood, even if you are suffering inside, is a completely different matter. In our culture of the good mood dictate, it is suggested to you that negative feelings are a sign of weakness, that you have failed if you feel sad, angry, or anxious. This constant pressure to be positive creates stress. You feel compelled to maintain a certain image even when you are exhausted inside. Imagine you are wearing a mask of positivity that you are not allowed to take off. This mask forces you to always smile, always function, always say, everything is fine. But it's bubbling under the mask. Every time you suppress your true feelings, you put your body under stress. Your mind fights against your reality, causing you to constantly live in a state of inner tension. This constant stress activates your sympathetic nervous system, the part of your body responsible for the fight or flight response. The problem is that our bodies are not made for prolonged stress. Short-term stress is something our system can handle. But when stress becomes chronic, as is often the case with forced optimism, the body starts to feel the strain. You will notice it in your sleeping behavior, your digestion, and even your energy levels. Your body remains on alert and this depletes your energy reserves. You may notice that you tire more quickly, feel less rested, or fall ill more often. In the long term, this internal pressure leads to a state of burnout. Burnout is not only caused by overwork, but also by the emotional pressure we put on ourselves. The compulsion to always be positive creates mental exhaustion, which affects your body. You feel empty inside, burnt out, and unable to cope with the demands of life. This state arises because you fight against your own emotions instead of recognizing them and giving them space. Another problem with forced optimism is that it often leads us to ignore real problems. If you are only ever supposed to see the positive, you will eventually start to deny unpleasant realities. But ignoring problems doesn't solve them. On the contrary, it allows them to grow until they become so big that they are no longer manageable. Constantly trying to see everything as good prevents you from finding real solutions and making necessary changes in your life. This internal struggle for constant positivity can lead to more serious health problems in the long term. Studies show that chronic stress caused by suppressed emotions increases the risk of heart disease, high blood pressure, and other stress-related ailments. The body keeps giving you signals, but the compulsion to be positive makes you overlook these signals, until the body finally gives in. So what is the solution? We need to learn to distinguish between genuine positivity and forced optimism. True positivity comes from a space of inner acceptance. It doesn't mean that you ignore your negative feelings, but that you acknowledge them and find a way to move forward in your life anyway. It's okay if not every day is full of happiness and joy. It's important to learn when to allow your body and mind to just be without constantly forcing things. In the next chapter, we will look at how the gap between what we feel on the inside and what we portray on the outside can lead to inner conflict. This conflict, between reality and the illusion of constant optimism, increases the pressure on our mind and body. When we constantly force ourselves to think positively and maintain an optimistic facade, it creates an internal conflict between how we really feel and how we present ourselves on the outside. This conflict can destabilize us in a subtle but powerful way. It creates a gap between the reality of our inner world, the worries, fears, doubts, and challenges, and the illusion we present to ourselves and others. But what happens when this gap becomes too big? What happens when what we pretend to be no longer matches what we really experience? This inner rift is often described as cognitive dissonance, the mental stress that occurs when our beliefs, thoughts, and actions are out of alignment. When we keep trying to convince ourselves that all is well while our inner self is screaming the opposite, this inner contradiction begins to wear us down. We are torn between the desire to maintain the image of the positive thinker and the truth of our own feelings. A classic example of this is the use of positive affirmations. Many people resort to affirmations to encourage themselves and steer their thoughts in a positive direction. But what happens if the affirmations don't match what we really believe inside? If you keep telling yourself, "I am strong, I am successful, I am happy," when in reality you feel exhausted, stressed, and insecure, an inner conflict arises. Your mind rejects these affirmations because they don't match your current reality. This dissonance increases the inner pressure and the feeling of dishonesty, both towards yourself and others. This disconnect between reality and illusion can lead to a state of inner alienation in the long run. You may feel cut off from yourself, as if you are playing a role that does not really belong to you. Your true self remains hidden as you conform to the expectations of others and the constant demand to be positive. This alienation can cause you to distance yourself further and further from your true feelings, a state that leads to emotional numbness and inner emptiness. Another effect of this discrepancy is the disappointment that arises when the illusion of constant optimism collides with reality. When we constantly tell ourselves or others that everything will be fine, we often set unrealistic expectations. However, life is not always predictable and sometimes things happen that are out of our control. When these unexpected challenges arise and we realize that positive thinking alone is not enough to overcome them, we can become deeply disappointed. The gap between what we expected and what actually happens leaves us feeling powerless. This inner conflict between reality and illusion is often reinforced by the outside world. Social media, where other people's lives often appear perfect, contribute to us feeling pressurized to constantly appear optimistic and successful. However, the reality behind the perfect images often remains hidden, and this contrast reinforces the feeling that we can't keep up with our own lives. It's important to understand that it's not about rejecting optimism altogether. Rather, it's about finding a way that leaves room for both positivity and the reality of our feelings. True positivity does not come from denying our inner world, but from the ability to recognize our emotions, both positive and negative, and integrate them into our lives. The key lies in authenticity. By being honest with ourselves and others, we create a foundation for true well-being. It's okay to not always be strong or happy. It's okay to feel vulnerable, to have fears, or to struggle in difficult times. By accepting this reality instead of keeping up a facade, we give ourselves permission to truly heal, mentally, emotionally, and physically. In the next chapter, we will take an in-depth look at the physical effects caused by the pressure of forced optimism. We will look at how this inner conflict affects the body and can lead to chronic stress symptoms. As we delve further into the inner conflict between reality and illusion, it quickly becomes clear that it is not just our minds that are burdened. Suppressed emotions, especially those that are masked by forced optimism, leave deep marks on the body. Our emotional well-being and our physical well-being are inextricably linked. What we don't want to feel often manifests itself as physical discomfort. But how exactly does this suppressed emotional pressure affect our body? If you are constantly forcing yourself to think positively and ignore your true feelings, you are subjecting your body to a prolonged state of stress. The body is on alert because it cannot process the suppressed emotions. Negative emotions such as sadness, anger, or fear are natural reactions of human existence. They are not bad or wrong, on the contrary, they serve a purpose. They show us when something is out of balance in our lives. But when we suppress these emotions, they create internal pressure that pushes outwards, often in the form of physical symptoms. A key phenomenon in this context is chronic stress. When we ignore our true feelings and instead force ourselves to remain positive, this puts our nervous system in a permanent state of tension. The sympathetic nervous system, which is responsible for the fight or flight response, remains active. Cortisol, the main stress hormone, is continuously released, which can have devastating long-term effects on the body. Blood pressure rises, the immune system is weakened and inflammatory processes are promoted. A good example of this is the development of chronic diseases. Studies have shown that people who experience stress and suppressed emotions over long periods of time have a higher risk of suffering from heart disease, high blood pressure, gastrointestinal complaints, or even autoimmune diseases. The body reacts to the unresolved inner conflicts by repeatedly sending signals: pain, fatigue, digestive problems. These symptoms are often an expression of what has not been processed internally. Another area in which suppressed emotions make themselves felt is muscle tension. Emotions that are not expressed often settle in the body, especially in areas such as the neck, shoulders, or back. People who repeatedly force themselves to remain emotionally strong often complain of chronic tension and pain for which there is no clear medical explanation. These physical complaints are direct manifestations of the emotional burden they are carrying. The digestive system also suffers from the burden of suppressed emotions. Stress and emotional tension can lead to gastrointestinal problems such as irritable bowel syndrome, heartburn, or chronic stomach pain. The gut, often referred to as the second brain, is particularly sensitive to emotional states. If we do not give space to our true feelings, this often has a direct effect on our digestion. But what can be done to break this cycle? The first step is to become aware of the fact that the body is a mirror of our inner state. Emotions that are not expressed or recognized will sooner or later take their toll. It is important to pay attention to the body's signals and recognize when it is telling us that we need to stop and check our emotional state. One solution is to consciously face your feelings and give them space. This means allowing yourself to feel sadness, anger, or fear without suppressing them. Emotions that are allowed to flow freely do not leave permanent traces in the body. Instead, they help you to restore balance and release the pressure that has built up. Meditation, mindfulness, and therapeutic techniques such as bodywork or breathing therapy can help you to process and release these suppressed emotions. If you regularly feel inside yourself and learn to be aware of your feelings, you can release the inner pressure before it manifests itself in the form of physical complaints. In the next chapter, we will look at how you can find a healthy way of dealing with your emotions. We'll talk about how to acknowledge and process negative feelings without getting stuck in them, and how to create a healthy balance between positivity and emotional authenticity. Now that we've dealt with the physical effects of repressed emotions, it's time to find a solution. The key is to create a balance between positivity and the authentic experience of our emotions. But how can you learn to recognize negative emotions without sinking into them? How do you find a healthy way that allows you to experience both pain and joy without letting one side overwhelm you? The first step to a healthy emotional balance is acceptance. We live in a world that often encourages us to repress unpleasant feelings or quickly hide them behind a facade of everything will be fine. However, denying or repressing emotions only leads to them becoming ingrained in us and exploding at some point. Instead, we need to learn to recognize these feelings, accept them, and give them space. Acceptance does not mean that you have to approve of your negative emotions, but that you allow them to be there without fighting against them. A powerful method for practicing this acceptance is mindfulness. By feeling into yourself and recognizing your emotions without judging them, you give them the space they need to flow. Deal with your feelings as they are. Feel where the emotions show up in your body, perhaps as a tightness in your chest, a knot in your stomach, or tension in your neck. Observe them without wanting to get rid of them immediately. This mindfulness allows you to untangle the emotional chaos within you without being overwhelmed by it. Another important step is to develop compassion for yourself. Many of us are trained to be hard on ourselves. We often feel like we are failing if we are not consistently positive or strong. But compassion means giving yourself permission to be human. It's okay to show weakness, feel sad, or have fears. These feelings don't make you less valuable, they make you authentic. Having compassion for yourself in these moments means treating yourself as you would treat a good friend, with understanding and kindness. Another way to process emotions is through creative expression. Feelings that cannot be expressed in words often find expression in creative activities. Writing, painting, music, or dancing are all ways of channeling your emotions. When words are not enough to describe your inner states, creative expression can be a liberating way to externalize what lies dormant within you. It is also helpful to promote emotional balance through healthy relationships. Sometimes we need someone to just listen without telling us how we should feel. In a supportive community, whether through friends, family, or a therapist, we can express our feelings more freely, without fear of judgment. Sharing emotions in a safe space can be incredibly healing. It reminds us that we are not alone and that our experiences, whether positive or negative, are part of being human. Another technique for integrating emotions is breath work. When you feel overwhelmed by your emotions, conscious breath can help you process and calm them. The breath is a powerful tool that helps us stay in the moment and control the flow of emotions. By breathing deeply and consciously, you can bring the body into a state of relaxation and relieve the pressure caused by suppressed emotions. The aim of all these practices is to create a healthy balance between experiencing emotions and maintaining a positive state of mind. It is not about avoiding all negative feelings or covering them up with forced optimism. Rather, it's about making space for the full spectrum of human experience and giving yourself permission to dwell in the darkness when necessary while finding your way back into the light when the time is right. By learning to acknowledge your emotions without sinking into them, you will find a more authentic self. The pressure to always be positive gives way to a deeper acceptance of life in all its facets. This balance is the key to inner peace and long-term well-being, both emotionally and physically. In the next chapter, we'll summarize everything and conclude by talking about how you can cultivate this balance in your daily life and why it's important to differentiate between true optimism and toxic positivity. After our journey through the dangers of forced optimism, the physical effects of repressed emotions and the ways to find a healthy balance, we now come to a crucial point. How can we be positive in our lives without losing ourselves in the process? How can we cultivate an authentic form of optimism that leaves room for all our emotions and at the same time gives us the strength to get through difficult times? Positivity is not the problem, it is forced optimism that harms us. The pressure to always be happy, always strong, always in a good mood leads us to an inner imbalance. But it is possible to be positive without suppressing your true feelings. It is about creating a space in which positivity does not arise from compulsion, but from a deep inner conviction. Authentic positivity starts with self-acceptance. It's okay not to be happy all the time. It is okay to experience weakness, sadness, anger, and fear. These emotions do not make us less valuable or less strong. They are a part of being human, and they need to be accepted just as much as the positive feelings. By allowing yourself to feel your true emotions instead of pushing them away, you can find true peace, and that is the true essence of happiness. Healthy optimism comes from the ability not to give up in difficult times, but also not to deny what is really happening. It means facing life's challenges with an open mind, knowing that you have the inner strength to overcome them, not by ignoring the problems, but by recognizing that they exist and can be overcome. True optimism is not blind, but based on trust. Trust in yourself, in your ability to grow and learn, even when life is difficult. The Buddhist approach of the middle way is a wonderful example of this. This is about avoiding extreme emotions and finding a balanced path between joy and suffering. This approach teaches us that we can keep our lives in balance by recognizing both sides of the human experience, the joy and the pain. In this way, authentic optimism leads us not into denial, but into acceptance of what is, while looking forward. A crucial technique for walking this path is mindfulness. When you are consciously present in the moment, you can recognize your emotions without being overwhelmed by them. You recognize them, but you don't completely identify with them. This creates a space of inner freedom in which you can decide how you react to life. Mindfulness allows you to develop positivity from a place of calm and clarity, rather than from a place of coercion or denial. Self-care also plays a central role. In a world that often demands us to be strong all the time, it's important to give yourself permission to take breaks, seek support and listen to your own needs. You can't always be there for others or maintain a perfect facade if you ignore your own needs. Self-care means taking time to replenish your energy, taking care of your body and mind and giving yourself space to be yourself, with all your facets. An important final thought: optimism is a choice, not an obligation. There are times when you choose to be optimistic because you see the light at the end of the tunnel. But there are also times when it's okay to feel the darkness without feeling compelled to immediately turn it into light. Both are part of life, and both are justified. Accepting both sides, the positive and the negative emotions, leads to a much deeper form of happiness that is based on authenticity, not on an artificial mask. In this sense, the true path to a fulfilling, positive life lies in being honest with yourself. Recognize your true feelings without letting them rule you. Recognize the beauty of life without denying the difficulties. And remember that positivity is most powerful when it comes from a place of inner acceptance and strength. With these thoughts, we can close the circle. Positive thinking is not the goal, but the result of a deep connection to yourself. By allowing yourself to be authentic, you will discover that true happiness and inner peace come not from denial, but from integration and balance.